All right, Phil, we've got an amazing guest on the pod this time or this week. And, it's interesting, the story and how we were introduced to this guy, and how we got him on was actually easier than half the guests we get that we asked to come on, just because we put something out there. If anyone was listening, avid listeners, episode 94, we did a recap on the Littlest Green Beret, Jan Rutherford, who came into our Junto group, gave us a private session. I think you're an executive coach for one of the guys in the group. And it was so awesome that we had to do a pod on it. And then I posted on LinkedIn, tagged you, and you're like, hey, this was great. I would love to jump on and talk more about that. And we couldn't have asked for a better guest this week to dive into all the things that you're working on, Jan. So thanks for jumping on. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks. It was such a cool surprise. I was telling you that all of a sudden I see I'm tagged and I'm like, I don't remember being on this podcast. and I listened to the whole thing. And by the way, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. I mean, I'm real picky about the ones I listen to. I listened to the whole thing because I found it fascinating to hear what you guys remembered from what I said, and what the stories that resonated, or the pithy quotes. It was really interesting to go, this stuck. So that was kind of cool.
That's awesome. And it really was a great impact when you came in. It was so strong because we haven't had too many people coming into that group. Like, we're pretty picky about who comes in to present to that group too.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you enjoyed it, because it was all real. And it was like, anyone who wants to dive into episode 94, you'll get more of our takeaways. But this show is about you. We want to dive into your life and, what you're doing out there in the world, and all the cool things you're doing with the crucibles and self-reliant leadership and all that stuff. So, but we gotta start with go all the way back to, what is the Littlest Green Beret? Why do you call yourself that? Why'd you write yourself a book about that?
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if I should have really titled it that. That was my first book, The Littlest Green Beret on Self-Reliant Leadership. And there's a picture on the cover of it with me standing in front of what we call Bronze Bruce, big statue of Bronze Bruce. Basically, one foot's on a rock, which is on top of a snake, and then he's holding an M16, and he's got this cool pose. And when I got my beret, it was in front of Bronze Bruce. And there was a picture of me, and I weighed all of 114 pounds in this picture. And, scrawny little, I probably had a 26-inch waist, and there was just nothing to me. And I saw that picture as a barely 19-year-old, and I thought, if I ever write a book, that's going to be on there. And then I'm like, well, what should I call it? And there's, who knows if I'm the smallest. I didn't ever see anybody smaller than me, certainly not littler. There might have been somebody that was shorter, but then they were built like a brick house.
They're going to come out of the woodwork after this episode and be like, no, I'm the...
But, I just thought, the book's sort of biographical, but it really is about leadership and what I learned from all these other great people that I had the privilege to be around. And part of it, what I wanted to convey is, everybody's got something. I was little, I couldn't play football, but there's lots of things that we can do. And in the big scheme of things, these struggles that we encounter in our life are gifts. I mean, they're, and whether, and I call the expeditions we do crucibles, which are a severe test in which you're changed and molded into something more powerful. And I think all those things, all that adversity, and, the folks in your special group of peers, a lot of them are uber successful. And in my experience with uber successful people is they had adversity. They had something that was really hard, something that set them back, something that put a chip on their shoulder. Something where they wanted to prove somebody's wrong. They wanted to win. They didn't want to lose. And what I tried to do is just capture my story. And my hope was, as I told my story, people would say, well, this is how my story is, similar. And this is how me continuing to test myself changes my narrative and makes me a better human.
Before we jump into the crucible and kind of the ins and outs of what you're doing today, I want to just double click on what Steven said about you being such a culture fit for not only Junto, but this podcast. And what we're trying to convey was like, you have those moments, right, where in the first 3 minutes of talking to someone, you're like, this is a kindred spirit. They are studying and they really believe similar things that we do, which was very clear to me in the 2 minutes before you jumped in while we were there to talking about coaching and the impact and where it's going. It was just so refreshing and so excited for today. The podcast listeners are very familiar with this concept, and it seems to ring true with everything that you're saying. But we talk a lot about how comfortable modern day society is. And one of your quotes, I believe, was, if you want to know who you are, strip away comfort. Mm-hmm. And it is just loud and clear to us, to Stephen and I, that all of that growth that you talk about, all the hardships that bring people, create who they are not, it's not a smooth sea that creates a good sailor. Yeah. And so I would imagine that going through the Green Beret training was a part of that, but were there other events in your life that kind of just really drove home that getting out of your comfort zone and how it's the challenges in life that really define us?
Yeah, I'll tell you, there's two things I did that come to mind right away. Gosh, right after I got my MBA, I don't know why, but right after I got it, I went up and did 30 minutes a flight, which is like, a drug dealer giving you a drug, Yeah,
let's go.
Yeah. And so I, said I always wanted to be a pilot. So I became a pilot, and I thought when I got up there, the instructors would say, "Man, you're a natural. You are you are the best pilot I've ever seen." That did not happen. I mean, it was hard. Physically, it was hard because these little old rented planes, I could barely reach the rudder pedals. And a lot of times when you're taking off, the track of the seat would go back, and then I really couldn't reach the rudder pedals. So physically it was hard. A lot of times in some of these planes, I could barely see over the instrument panel. So that was hard. Emotionally, it was hard. When I was doing cross-country flights by myself, I'd wake up and go in the middle of the night going, I've got to take this plane and untie it. I got to fly it to Venice. This is in Florida. Then I got to fly it to Vero Beach, and then I got to fly it back to Orlando and put it in the exact same spot and tie it up. Like, that's really hard. And so, again, I just thought I'd get up there and I'd just be, Tom Cruise, Top Gun. And it was hard physically, emotionally, mentally. I studied harder to become a pilot than I did to get my MBA. Wow. So that was something that was really hard. And I had a couple mishaps where I went off the runway one time. I wrote about in my book, and the fire trucks came out, and nothing happened. I just went in the grass because I screwed up a crosswind landing. And I wanted to quit. I literally told the instructor, I'm like, I should just quit before I get myself killed or somebody else. And he's like, no, tomorrow we're going up. We're doing crosswind landings. And we did. So that was one thing that comes to mind. The other thing I did a few years ago was I did a TED Talk. And I feel like I could get up in front of 70,000 people in the stadium and I could just wing it. But this TED Talk just absolutely freaked me out because, you rehearse it, you've got to memorize it, which I don't memorize stuff. I don't have that good of a memory. And then you got to perform it. And right. I just thought, I got one shot. It's going to be out there forever. I'm either going to hit it or not. And man, was I nervous. I was so out of my comfort zone. It was one of those times when you're like, why? It's just like being up in a plane when you're having a hard time getting it landed because of the wind. You're like, why did I sign up for this? And again, all that stuff made you stronger, and it humbled you. I wasn't the pilot I thought I would be. I was good, and I flew my family. I ended up becoming a really good, safe pilot and flew my family all over the place. My TED Talk, I'm glad I did it. It wasn't that great. The script was really awesome. My performance was, subpar. But it was kind of like, all that stuff was don't get too big for your britches. You're not all that in a bag of chips.
Now, have you always had that? Like even growing up, you joined the special forces as, like you said, 114 pounds, like you're doing things and challenging yourself on purpose to find out what you're capable of. But most people don't do that. Like they're not going to go seeking out uncomfort and challenges like that. So where does that come from?
I don't know. I was telling somebody the other day, this person looked at me like I was crazy because I said, sometimes I don't know why I climb mountains. Honest to God, I've been in the car driving to climb a mountain at 3 a.m. and I'm like, I did not decide this. Like there was like, I was compelled. Like at some point, something entered my mind, said, go climb Mount Yale on, next Saturday. And then it's like, it wasn't even, it was like, I got to go climb Mount Yale. It went in my head and now I got to do it. And it's going to be hard and it's going to be cold and it's, I might not make it. And I don't know. I don't know where that comes from, other than one time when I got up on a mountain, I didn't think I was going to get all the way to the top. And I thought, every time I've gotten up on top, I'm like, I feel like I'm in the Sistine Chapel. I can't take it all in. You just as a human aren't capable.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, well, I'm not going up there for the view and the picture. I'm going up there to prove that I could do something hard. And that way, what I carry down the mountain is the confidence that I can do hard things for the next year or so until I do something else where I really push myself.
Something you just said there is top of mind for what Stephen and I have been chatting with on the podcast and off. But this idea of letting life and these callings like that, when you said, I didn't really plan to go up the mountain, but letting life kind of come through you. And to me, that it does take on a higher power, kind of a spiritual concept, but that being of service and taking those inputs or those calls to action and then being a filter or a prism on how that shows up in the world. That was just so timely, the way you just said that, Stephen. I don't know if you had any thoughts there based on our conversation we were having just last night, actually.
No, yeah. We were talking about one of the episodes we just did last week was where do ideas come from and like how do we take action? Like we have to take immediate action on. Like, I just had this thing pop in my head and does it align with my core values? Does it spark the energy? And I'm excited about it. It's like, yeah, then just go do it and then find out what you're capable of and, move on. But it does add that confidence. I think you're right in how you challenge yourself on purpose. You find out what you're capable of. And then you're like, oh man, this wasn't maybe the performance wasn't great, like you said in the TED Talk, but you did it. And now you can say you've done it and you can learn from it. And it's another learning opportunity to get better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, part of my TED Talk, I remember part of it was, we've got to move outside our comfort zone.
Yeah.
Our zone of comfort is, I think, the way I phrased it. We see it every day. In my coaching, there's lots of people that, they might be frustrated at their job and they're like, okay, what do you value? Well, I don't, I'm sick of this and I want, but then when you really get into it, it's like, well, they value stability and security and the paycheck. They don't want to take a risk because they might fail. What's interesting,
but they might also wildly succeed, right?
Right.
They might.
I was at a Green Beret ceremony a few years back, and the thing that's struck me that I'd never really thought about before was he said, hey, here's America's newest strategic weapon. Look at all these, soldiers. One thing to keep in mind, looking at these, however many it was, 100 or whatever, there was a whole bunch of people that tried and didn't make it. And you have to remember that these people that made it knew they had a good chance of failing.
The odds are stacked.
If you go and through that training and you fail, if you're an officer, your career's over. Yeah. You've been outside the conventional army is not going to really take you back. And I thought, wow, when I went in, I was just a teenager. There was no downside, for me. But, now they don't let teenagers go special forces. I think they have to be 21 or 22 or 23. Whenever we endeavor onto something where we might fail, that's a sign of courage to me. And there's lots of areas in the business world where we see it. I was coaching somebody the other day that, has a moral dilemma. They need to talk to their boss about somebody that shouldn't be there and they want to preserve the relationship with the boss and they know the standards here and this person's not meeting it. And it's like, you might jeopardize this relationship. And it reminds me that, especially when it comes to integrity, very often it will cost something. If you're going to stand up for something, it might cost a relationship. It might cost your job. It might cost something. But, in the Army, it's easy to talk about courage and combat and all that. But in the business world, there's every single day as leaders, we have to demonstrate moral, ethical, legal, courage. for the decisions we make. They're hard. They don't get to our desk because they're easy decisions.
Right. And that's a good segue into self-reliant leadership and what you do and how you coach executives. And, so what does that mean to you, self-reliance?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people think it's a dichotomy, that self-reliant is just about you and you don't need anybody else. But what this came to me actually in the military, I realized that to be a really good follower, you have to be squared away. You have to be squared away mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. You got to be ready to step in when they ask you. And so you have to be self-reliant. If the job is to carry 4 liters of water up the mountain and everybody's got to carry 4 liters, you got to carry it. In the business world, you got a workload. And again, in the white collar world, it's easy to hide behind stuff. The blue collar world, much harder. But you have to be self-reliant. So you have to lead yourself. And then when you take on more responsibility, you have to lead others. And hopefully what you're doing is teaching them to be self-reliant, to be reliable to their peers, to not be that guy or that gal that lets people down. And then at the highest level, you really got to lead the organization. You've got to figure out, how do I design an environment where great behaviors happen? The environment, the culture, and built around strategy. What we really learn when we're out on the crucible expeditions with executives, they take a step back and they figure out what's really important. The urgent, important stuff will fill up the calendar every single day. The things that will move the needle that are important and never urgent have to be scheduled. And you can't do that if you're in the trenches all the time. So again, I really think it's those 3 pillars. You have to lead yourself. You have to lead others effectively, which is what we think of as traditional leadership. And then you really have to lead at the highest level as a designer of an environment, of a culture.
Where do you see, because we see this so often in the business world, right? You have someone that is extremely self-reliant. They have high agency, which is almost a synonym there that I've been thinking about a lot. Who are the high agency people in your organization? But that is what launches them, whether it's self-directed or the organization sees them as, oh, this is a leader. And then they're thrust into a whole different set of skill sets that requires a different type of people skills than strictly self-reliance. Yeah. Could you talk us through some of the ways you've seen that not working and what that growth and coaching looks like for folks that find themselves in that situation, because it's all too common in the business world?
Yeah, and I'll refer to one of my favorite podcasts I've ever heard. It's Why Are There So Many Bad Bosses on Freakonomics? And it was basically about the Peter Principle, which is you'll be promoted to your highest level of incompetence, is the Peter Principle. But the dilemma, I think, Philip, is that we're really good at identifying performance. Hey, here's the behaviors that align to the core values. Here's the results, and those 2 things equal performance. Performance doesn't mean potential. We're really bad at establishing the criteria for potential for advancement. From the guests I've had on my show, like the former head of HR for Jack Welch at General Electric, he said there was 2 things. 1, they're strategic. They ask strategic questions about the big picture. And 2, they're networked in the organization. They already have power and influence. I would add on to that, they raise their hand. They want to take on more responsibility. That is, critical. But again, I think organizations really have to establish that. Just because someone's a good performer does not mean they're going to have that potential. And again, I think the key thing, and I was talking to somebody today about this, and this happens especially in financial services, lots of player coaches. Well, you're asking people, hey, do you want to get the deal done? Or you want to grow and develop your people? Well, the CEO says, what matters most is results. Well, they're never going to make a choice to spend time developing their people. They're going to hit their number. We've got to figure out, how do we identify people that are motivated and driven by developing people as coaches, and people that can negotiate up to their boss and say, hey, I can do this, but I can't do this and develop my people. and to a point where I can delegate and do what only I can do. So it's a dance. And, if it's a company that all it cares about is hitting its number and it's just pressure, then you're never going to develop people. And you're just going to have people, a whole bunch of deal guys.
You bring up, and tying it back to what you just said about that's the risk portion too. Am I willing to risk making these decisions depending on what my superiors will think? Right. That's where a lot of the risk, I think, could get mitigated. And I'm not going to risk my reputation, my career path to make this call. And that's why certain things might say, I hadn't thought about that till you just mentioned.
Yeah. I'm reading a really good book right now, and we're going to interview the guy tomorrow. The author, Kurt Gray, wrote a book called Outraged. He's a Harvard professor. And basically the premise of the book of moral harm and why we can't get along politically and all that is that we've gotten evolution wrong, that we think we're predators, but he said, we don't have sharp claws and big canines. We're prey. We need groups of people. We need to be socially smart. I was in the woods today and I went by a cliff, and I'm like, I wasn't around going, hey, what can I kill? I was going, if I was a mountain lion, this is where I would ambush somebody. And so I'm in the woods thinking more like prey than I am thinking predator. And I think it explains a lot of how we behave in the workplace. I try to coach people all the time to be bold. And what prevents them from being bold is they're afraid. They have fear. They fear harm, that something bad is going to come, stability, they're going to get fired, whatever it is. And so again, because of, I think, the way that we have evolved, we're afraid. And again, I'm not saying that we need to shift into, fight and predator and all that kind of thing, but we need to be mindful of, what are we afraid of here? And if we're afraid, we're not going to advance anything forward.
Yeah, it's like it's just a nice, elegant confidence. When you have this confidence that you can, you've been in the trenches. A lot of leaders, and that's also the biggest problem, I think, is a lot of leaders have done all the work. Like, they don't ask people necessarily to do work that they haven't already done, but they also have become experts and masters of their craft. And now they have to delegate because that's what their role requires. And they don't yet have that trust. So how do you coach a leader to allow their team to fail as they're learning and being developed, and then being okay with it without saying, oh, I'll just do it myself?
Yeah. Well, we interviewed somebody recently that said there's two things that you will say that are always true the first time. And that is, it's easier if I do it myself, it's faster, or I can do it better. That will always be true the first time. And that if you're going to delegate, you have to remember that's an investment. And, I think there's two types of delegation. One, you delegate to develop people. And then there's delegate to, produce results. And we need to be mindful that when we delegate, we need to be clear with our expectations, but we can't give this much responsibility for someone that hasn't proven they can handle this much responsibility. Mm-hmm. It has to be incremental, and every time they do it. But one of the things that we have to do, and again, we're afraid to do this, is we have to trust people.
Yeah, that's the hardest part.
And you know what? They might fail. They might disappoint us. They might take advantage of us. They might make us look bad. All those things might happen when we delegate. But we've got to be prepared. And again, we've got to do our homework and make sure we've done everything we can to make sure people know the expectation. And again, we all know, we just talked about this. The only way you're going to develop and grow people is by letting them make little mistakes that are okay. Nobody grows and learns a whole bunch by succeeding. And we have to remember that. And, this trust goes two ways. For them to trust us as leaders, we've got to let them know we trust you.
Well, and I think that also goes, self-leadership, self-reliance, like that you talked about. You have to put that oxygen mask on. You alluded to that. You have to be able to take care of yourself from your mind, body, heart, and all that stuff, right? Like, if you're not okay, you can't lead other people in a successful way.
Exactly.
So that's where that self-reliant comes back into play, right? Yeah. Is you're focused on yourself to make a positive impact on others. And when you're confident in your ability, and then you become confident in your team and the way you're developing them, I think that's what you're trying to say is how you develop them. It starts with you. Yeah. And then it goes, like, you're almost caught, not taught. Like, you're not even teaching, you're just operating at such a high level that people see that and they want to be like that leader who's a part of their world.
Well, and remember, I've been reminding people a lot lately, hey, there's performance for most, individual contributors. That's, hey, I behave according to the core values and I get paid a base salary and I produce results and that's my variable comp. Well, with leaders, are the third leg to the stool, and that is you have to attract and develop and retain talent. You have to grow people and you have to grow leaders. So to perform as a leader is just two legs of the stool. But if you don't have a number two ready to step in, you haven't done your job.
Yeah.
And if you're doing all the work, then my question is always, what is it that only you can do that you need to do right now? Or what is it that's not getting done while you're doing everybody else's job? And the other thing I'll say sometimes is you're not paid to do your old job. You're paid a lot of money to do high value work. You've got people.
And replicate yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, what I learned in special forces, that it's such a great concept for the business world is, 12 guys go out in the middle of nowhere and they create a fighting force at 1,200. You are a force multiplier. Well, how's that different than what we're supposed to do in the business world? Force multiply people, force multiply, revenue, growth, whatever, however we're supposed to take X amount of resources and multiply them. That's growing a business.
When you've got such an incredible background with, being in the special forces, right? That's life and death decisions that people are making. If you don't operate under this structure, you make the wrong move, that could be it for somebody in your troop. And so in the business world, it may not be that extreme, but those same principles apply.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. In the military, it is, life or death. And sometimes, most of the time it's, routine stuff. In the business world, it's time or money. But the thing that's the same, as I reflect back on my career, there's get work and do work. And in order to get work and do work, you really have to develop people. It's the essence of it.
Yeah.
And, we can tell people what to do. But the way that we really gain commitment over mere compliance is we help people self-discover. We help people gain the confidence to feel like they can do things and that they can be bold and do things. And, I think part of it is knowing early on, as far as being a leader, that you're going to get a lot more from somebody, that you might not go home at night and say, hey, I got to mow the lawn today. Look how pretty it looks. Like, you don't get to ever feel like that. It's a grind. And that maybe what you did today, you'll hear about it in 2 years, that, the investments you made in people and things and, really pay off. But you can't go into leadership thinking I'm going to get immediate gratification every single day. You're just not.
No. You mentioned it being referred to it as a dance, and so many of the things that I've heard from your perspective talk about that. It's these fine lines and delicate moments on when we can make these decisions and how we're growing and helping those individuals on our team that really come down to, yes, the self-reliance of knowing you have the proper skill set to pass on this knowledge, but picking those moments properly because it's a growing organism. Like this thing is growing and constantly evolving. And if you're not hitting those moments, sure, you can bounce back, but you've missed an opportunity for that organism to reach its next level or next phase.
Yeah. I think really most of what I really do as an executive coach is really help people with levels of self-awareness. And by that, it's like, level one would be, hey, I can be gruff. A higher level would be, hey, when I'm gruff, this is how it affects other people and not in a good way. level 3 would be, hey, I know I'm this way. I know it affects people in a bad way. And I have the emotional wherewithal to control my response that will deliver what's best for the team, not that satisfies my own pride and ego. And, and part of it is, this self-awareness. There's a great story, a Chinese parable about hearing the unheard. And to me, that's what a high level leader does is, they hear the unheard. And because the higher up you go, you're going to think you're better looking, you're funnier, you're the smartest guy in the room. If you're not hearing the unheard, you're not going to get the truth of what's really going on, what your impact is. And, the kind of questions I ask people is, hey, are all the ideas coming from you? Is anybody disagreeing with you? Those kind, and if they go, well, everybody's buying in, like,
yeah,
you're missing something here, pal.
If you're not getting
created a bunch
pushback,
of sycophants.
Yeah, if you're not getting pushback and collaborating with your team, probably a lot of yes people on the team and have other thoughts about you.
Or they're not yes people. You've created an environment where it's bad for them to say no. There's punishment.
Yeah. So where did the crucibles come in? The adventures you did that you bring executives on, and you've got veterans that join you, and talk about that a little bit.
Well, we run these expeditions with executives, and the executives, we partner with veterans who are transitioning out, mostly from the special operations community. But I thought about this a long time ago. Like, gosh, I'd love to do leadership out in the wilderness, because what I could do in 4 days, I can't do in a year, with people, because it's just so impactful. And we've been from Patagonia to Alaska. We've been lots of different places. And, the themes will come out of those all the time. And again, I don't think they're really super hard. They can be hard and challenging. Sometimes it's cold or hot or whatever. But, we talk a lot about communication, a lot about decisions, a lot about adversity, a lot about teamwork. And stuff that happens out there is completely relatable to what happens in the business world. And we'll get the veterans' perspective on things to the executives that they've never heard. The executives will share with the veterans, hey, as you're retiring or leaving the military, this is how it's different in the business world. And, it's just a really great environment for people to step back. And for the executives and the founders, it's really a great place for them to kind of take a step back and go, am I working on the right stuff?
Yeah.
And what always comes up on those trips is people at some point, and again, not led by me, but it will come up. What's a good life? And am I living one? And a good life, what ends up happening is people decide a good life isn't retirement, an event. I sell my company. A good life is not something in the future. It's like a good life needs to be today. And as Joel Peterson from, the chairman of JetBlue said to us on a podcast, 24 hours is more than enough time every day if you've got your priorities right. To work out, spend time with your family, do a hobby, get your work done, eat, sleep, all that.
Yeah, what's a perfect
but most
day
people
look like
think 3 weeks from now, when I get X done, my life's going to be better. When the kids are out of diapers, my life's going to be better. When the kid starts driving themselves, life's going to, we take this trip to Hawaii, life's going to be better. And so what people realize is, hey, if I'm not squared away, if I'm not living a good life, what kind of role model am I for the people that I want to follow me? People want to follow people that are positive and hopeful. And, they look at him, they're like, man, this dude's squared away. He's, he's got, he's not wondering and saying, his life's a big mess.
Well, I'm sure taking those leaders out of the office like that, like you said, you're in nature, you have no technology around, and and a lot of times you're working in groups, but you're probably lost in your own thoughts. And that's where it gets triggered. And you're like, what do I want the rest of my life to look like? When I get home, what do I want to start building? And how do I create my perfect day? And how do I just do that every day?
Yeah. And again, if you have a partner, a spouse, this isn't something you can do in a vacuum, of course. Yeah. And, we not every trip, but most trips we try to do a solo challenge for 3 hours. And I have a little laminated card. I have a little journal, and I send people out and I give them 4 things at least to think about, just to like a little starter. And 3 things happen. Always with whoever goes out, there's people come back and one of 3 things happened. 1, they had an epiphany. Like, 2, they took a nap. Or 3, they could not stand to be alone, and they found other people they could talk to. Because, we told them, hey, go out, and there will be a couple, 2 or 3 or 4 people that just cannot stand it. They don't want to be alone in their thoughts, and they find other people to talk to.
What would you have done if someone gave you that same exercise?
I'd journal. I'd be alone in my. I'm an introvert, so I need lots of downtime.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
Yeah, it's but think about it. How many times in our life do we give ourselves 3 hours to just sit like in the woods or somewhere and just like hear the flies?
Not consuming anything, just silence.
Yeah, there's no book, there's no radio, there's no podcast, there's no mute. It's just you and nature.
Phil does that every single day. He finds the time somehow.
Well, I'll tell you a real quick story. And we were in the Willamette Mountains of Oregon, and we did a solo challenge, and I decided, I was going to go out by myself. I didn't need to stay at base camp. And I was getting ready to do my TED Talk I mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
So I went to practice. I found this little place in the woods in the mountains, and I was practicing my TEDx speech. And as I finished, I kid you not, a black fox looked at me, and then kept walking. And
that's awesome.
Like, nobody would ever believe this. And I'm like, where did he come from? Was he listening to me? But he kind of walked up and he looked at me, and then he just trotted off. And I've only seen 2 black foxes in my life, and that was one of them.
I believe it. I think there's something real there when especially with animals, right? When you're out and like all of a sudden you have this kind of epiphany, like you said, and there's an owl like looking at you or something like walks by, or and then you're like, what's the symbolism of that animal, and it resonates with all of everything you were thinking. Like, I think there's something to that. There's we're all connected somehow.
But it's also just, were you present enough to allow that experience to come to you? Yeah. And to have the space to have that moment in consciousness to where you realized what's happening. And I'm with you, Jan, that I think that's where we're missing the boat. It's kind of back to the thought of letting the world come through us. Yeah. And having the presence and space to do it while still being self-reliant and executing on the items that we have to execute on.
You're making me think about something, on the every expedition I've come back from, I drive, wherever I'm coming back, and I'm going through everything, as a leader. What did I do right? What did I do wrong? I shouldn't have said this. I wonder how the impact. I do a whole after action review on myself, but what always is startling to me is I'd like to think when I'm out there, I really pay attention to the group dynamic, and our professional guides are really mitigating risks. They're focused on from an engineering safety perspective. But the other thing that surprises me also is there's some people that go out there and really take in the aesthetic beauty of nature. And there's some people, like, you'd point out a rock or a bush or an animal, and they're, oh, okay. And it's like, how do you not find joy in just that, like seeing an insect, trying to pick up a rock, or, how do you, that perplexes me, that, our society is such that people have forgotten how to be in the woods.
Now, how much have you learned from these expeditions and having all walks of life coming through there and kind of picking up? Does that help you with your coaching and all that too? Is like different types of personalities and all that?
I'll be vulnerable with you guys. Yeah. I'll tell you what I learned is there's some people that go out, and guides that we have that we work with, and some of the leaders that we've had out there, participants that are awesome, with people one-on-one like this. They just have a gift, this charisma. You'd follow them anywhere. And then there's me. I think I am best suited to be the designer. I'm the one that figures out who should go on it. Who do I pair them with? How do I design this curriculum? Where do we go? How do I provide guidance to the guides? Yeah, how do I set expectations? I figured out in 10 years and 25 expeditions that I'm the designer. That's my best and highest use. There's other people, and I'm out there and I'm leading, but there's other people that are far better one-on-one with people and teams out there, that they just have this gift that's just amazing. And I'm totally okay being the person that set the stage and realized I created this. I brought all these people together, even though, very seldom does somebody make the comment like, man, I really appreciate what it took to pull this together. I mean, I probably had 2 people say that.
Yeah.
But I figured out, like, and what's, kind of interesting, I wish I'd figured that out way sooner in my career. It would have really helped me, position myself better and not put myself in situations where I wasn't going to succeed.
Well, isn't that what a great leader is all about? Is you're not after the recognition or the glory. You're putting your team in spots to be successful and make it feel like it's their idea for doing things, and that's what produces the results. And even though you saw it from a mile away, of what you just created the environment for them to thrive.
Yeah. Well, and again, I mean, especially those commandos from the special mission units. I mean, they're so good. With a small unit, with a small group. I mean, they're so good.
Yeah.
And again, one of the things that they make you feel when they're, because we have everybody takes a turn leading. When they're leading, you just know, like, I don't have anything to worry about. We're going to be safe. Everything's going to be fine. I mean, there's just this, like, you just know everything's going to be okay. And I mean, it's a gift. I mean, it's a gift that they've developed over years and years. And, God bless them, I mean, that there's the people that have that skill, and I'm glad I have the skill I have. And that's why, as an executive coach, I really like working with the C-suite, because, their job isn't to do it. Their job now is to think, how do you design an environment, a culture that supports your strategy, that's going to allow people to thrive, and that you bring out the best in the best people. And, you're really behind the scenes and constantly, what are the levers that I need to push or pull that are going to change the behaviors and patterns of behavior that produce the results we need. And again, it's hard.
That honing in on strengths and weaknesses, leaning into what you're good at and where you might have some gaps, and figuring that over time is it takes a lot of work. It doesn't just come with one journal session. I know you also talk a lot about something that I think is so key to performance and just living a fulfilled life, which is our dark side. And this is kind of goes in with the weaknesses, but it's more than that to me. It's really this portion of you. And we were talking about Carl Jung. Stephen and I were on the previous pod, but how have you found the best way for yourself or those that you're coaching to approach those conversations? Because I know for a fact, for me, it was extremely uncomfortable, scary a little bit, but could you talk through how you kind of approach that, the examination, embracing and growing through examining your dark side?
I want to make sure I understand, Phil. What do you mean? What are you referring to specifically when you say the dark side?
The portions of our consciousness or personalities and identities that we may not like, or they may expose things that are not societally acceptable, or the common traits of how we may usually get to performance or effectiveness.
Well, it's a great question. A really, really deep, great question. I remind my clients all the time, I'm not a psychologist, and I actually met with the Joint Special Operations Command psychologist recently, and we talk a lot about how we try to help veterans, and I try to remind myself that I need to stay in my lane, as an executive coach. So the difference is, the psychologist might examine where the behaviors come from. As an executive coach, I look at the behaviors that are, and I look at the behaviors that we need. And it's like, this is the chasm we cross. Okay. If you want to examine, hey, where did these behaviors come from? That's somebody else. But I think, part of moving people there is you are going to look at things. And I think with all these behaviors, there's a yin and a yang. If we're highly assertive, maybe we're not very deferential. And there might be times when we need to dial back our assertiveness and dial up our deference. We might be really good in enriching others and coaching and encouraging, and we're really lousy at correcting other people. And so, all these things that I believe are skills of leadership, interpersonal, there's a yin and a yang to all of them. And again, that's where the self-awareness comes in. Hey, where do I need to dial this up? Where do I need to dial it back? I say to the people I coach all the time, you're not broke. I don't need to fix you. But you need to be more self-aware because nobody's going to be all this way all the time or all this way all the time. We're going to have to really figure that out. People that are high in order, might be rigid. People that like lots of change might be all over the place and hard to follow and focus. And, but, the dark side and all that, to me, I think the darkest thing that I see that in the work world is when people are selfish. There's lots of ways that we can be dark, as human beings, but I think in the work world, when people are selfish, in all kinds of regards, and we had a name for them in the military. The initials was BF, and the first word was buddy, and the other one ended in ER. That was the worst thing that you could be. They called it Bravo Foxtrot. But if you screwed over your buddies, there was nothing worse. There was nothing worse than being that. And I wish the civilian world had an equivalent, like that moral standard. Like, if you screw over your buddies, you are going to be blackballed, persona non grata, or whatever. But unfortunately, sometimes when people are that way, they get ahead. They throw people under the bus, but that selfishness is really bad. When we're out in the field, selfishness could be, somebody that didn't come prepared. They're not in shape. They didn't break in their boots. Now they got a blister. Now we have to stop. They can't carry 4 liters of water like everybody else. In the work world, we see it all the time, but we don't call it out. Mm-hmm. The person that has to leave every day at 3:00 to see their kid's soccer game, which is great. But now somebody's got to work 2 extra hours to help make up for it. There's all kinds of ways that those selfish behaviors show up. And again, we have to take care of ourselves and our family, but we also have to have a responsibility and a duty to one another. And that's up to the leader to propagate, that sort of mentality.
Bamboo Jan, there.
As I was preparing for this conversation, I heard you in other mediums talk about leaders needing endurance. And I think what you were just kind of talking about was like, when do I push forward? When do I pull back? But at the grand scheme, I got to keep going. So why is endurance so important to be a great leader? Well,
when I was a CEO, that was when I really understood it, because I always worked when I got home at night, do whatever with the family, and then I'd do email and I'd work. When I was a CEO, I was incapable. I was emotionally spent and I was working longer hours. And I remember saying so many times, I can't imagine being a top executive and not being fit, like physically fit. I don't know how you do it. But the endurance, to hang in there, to push through pain, and I in some ways I learned it when I was in pharmaceutical sales. 4:45 on Friday, I'd pull the mirror down in the car before I went in the office, and I'd, go, it's showtime. Like, I don't feel like doing this. I don't feel like talking to another. I want to go home, but I need to make one more call. It's like, you just got to push through, and part of that's going above and beyond. And we all know our bodies are capable of much more than we thought, and but we also have to pay attention and know when we're stretching too much and burning out. But, I just think it's, that persistence, that determination. All the sales managers I had when I was really young were like, you don't have to be a silver-tongued fox. You don't have to know more than the doctors. But if you're persistent and determined and you can endure, you're going to be successful. And it was true.
I can't remember who said it, Phil. You might remember if it was David Goggins or Jocko, but it's like when your mind is telling you that you're done, like you have no more to give, you really have like another 40% to get. Like you're capable of giving. Who was that that said that?
They both said it, but I think it was Goggins that called it out specifically in the book to a percentage point of like you're typically only at about 40%.
Yeah. Well, I remember being, the hardest thing in special forces training for me was the rucksack runs. So it was a backpack, 50 pounds, and the speed at which we were going was 9 to 12 minute mile. And if they caught you running, they'd drop you for push-ups and you get behind. And so, my little legs, I had shin splints and
50 pounds. That's like what, 50%, 40% of your body.
Yeah,
weight,
I always
right?
thought it wasn't fair. Like, hey,
exactly.
This guy over here that weighs 180, he's got long legs. But the runs were I did okay on the runs. I was better than those guys, and I was better at pull-ups, but those rucksack runs just killed me. And I remember a time when this big guy said, Rutherford, grab the strap, like grab a strap on the back of his rucksack and like just hang on, and I'll just pull you along, like teamwork. And I remember I was on the verge of crying. I was in so much pain and distress. And I thought, and I remember going, just break me right now and let me fall apart. And then I'll be in a hospital and I'll be warm and nurses will be giving me a sponge bath. And cause I was afraid to quit. Like, I'm like, I'm not quitting. I mean, but I hope something bad happens to me. So I don't have to.
I'm forced to quit. Yeah.
But I remember being in that dark of a place that I really wished physical injury.
Yeah.
Which is terrible. But I mean, that pain, that was, really breaking point. Like I was broke, absolutely broke. And it wasn't like in the movies where some, the TAC officer or somebody was yelling at me. I was in the middle of a formation. It was pitch black and, like 3:30 in the morning. Nobody saw anything except the guy, my buddy Lowen. That's all I remember about his name, Lowen, from Montana. That was strong as an ox. He was kind of like, if the Joker playing for the Nuggets. He was kind of like, physically kind of like that guy. Like he kind of lumbered along. And
did he look like he didn't? He was like really good and just didn't look like he cared.
He didn't look like he tried. I mean, it wasn't hard for him to carry a 50. I mean, the guy was huge. Yeah. Carrying a 50-pound pack. I mean, he could have went it forever. But on a run, I could smoke him.
Yeah.
But those rucksack runs were torture.
Well, we thank you for your service and thank you for everything that you've done for this country and everything you've learned, obviously, and are bringing to the world. I got one final question for you before we wrap up here, Jan. And
I don't want to wrap up.
Phil doesn't want to wrap up. Phil wants to keep rolling.
No. We do. I'm looking forward to the answer to this question too.
What does success mean to you?
That's a good question. I mean, that goes back to, what's a good life? I remember being in a Vistage group, kind of like your group once. And, it was this whole, what's on your tombstone? And, and I thought, if there was a tombstone for me, it would be husband, father, granddad. That would be it. It wouldn't be any of the other stuff. Success, to me means that I've done, a lot, things that have fulfilled me. It means my kids are proud of me. It means, I'm a good husband, that I provided that we have options, to travel and see the world I think about it, and I'll give you the 5 things. And I thought about this recently, is, success to me means I have the ability and the time and the wherewithal to serve my clients, to serve, veterans, to serve my family, to serve myself, and, and the broader community. If my life is lived in the service of others, then that's a pretty good life.
That's pretty damn good. I love that. That's a great answer.
Great answer. Thank you so much for joining us
thanks, guys.
For this session, as well as the roundtable. And I have a feeling, or more so knowing, that you and I are going to be in contact for a while. So
good. Well, I appreciate it. It's always weird to be on the other side of the mic because
we'll tell the listeners where they can find you. You run a podcast. You're at episode 4,000 now or something.
Yeah. The Leadership Podcast is another podcast you can catch us on. But if anybody wants to reach me, self-reliantleadership.com. But again, I got to tell you this. Being on this side of the mic. And being a coach it's weird, because I told you the worst thing in work is somebody that's selfish, and being on this side of the mic, it always feels like at the end you feel like, gosh, I feel selfish. It was all about me.
Yeah.
And, and I want to ask you guys questions, and I want to, it's not reciprocal when you're being interviewed. So it's always this kind of weird feeling. So for those that listening, I hope that, there was some nuggets in there that really did provide, and it wasn't selfish, that there was parts of this that was really me giving.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great conversation. And you're in Denver, right?
Yep.
Is that where you're at now?
Yep.
If you're in town, May 9th, Friday, we're doing a little happy hour celebration for our 100th episode milestone. We're going to catch up to you, Jan, in 9 years. On how many episodes we have, but
congrats!
Thanks.
I will be in Monterey, not Phoenix.
I just missed you, but that'll be a blast. That's a great area.
Yeah, I was stationed there once upon a time. The Army had a whole division in Monterey.
Wow, that's how many years were you stationed
there? 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, thanks again, Jan.
We'll
catch up
Jan.
soon. For those of you listening to the pod, hope you enjoyed the conversation. Get to know Jan. Follow him on LinkedIn. He's active there. And subscribe, follow. We'll be back at you next week.